Hey everyone, the Sleep Nanny here, and we're going to look at reasons why your little one might be awake for long periods of time in the middle of the night. So those that are waking up and, they were awake for more than an hour, sometimes 2 hours, 3 hours of just being awake in the middle of the night. That's going to cause a disturbance for you and your child and leave you both overtired and not feeling great the next day. But why does it happen? Well, there could be a number of reasons. So the first thing you want to do is rule out any medical related reasons. Of course, if your little one's in pain or discomfort, then that could cause them to be awake for a while. If that's the case, it's more likely to happen as a kind of a blip. It's not likely that this will be an ongoing thing, but it's still worth ruling out any medical reasons. And usually you'll know if there's pain, especially as they get older, you'll know if it's pain as opposed to just awake. But rule out anything medical, get them checked out if there's something you think could be keeping them awake. There's all sorts of reasons why their sleep could be disturbed for medical reasons. And one that I've seen crop up a few times, weirdly enough, is glue ear. I've seen a few children who have been awake for several hours, happy, quite happy, content, not looking for anything, just awake. It turned out they had glue ear. So, and that's a condition with fluid behind the eardrum, and have a look at that one if you want to know more about it. This isn't medical related at all, what I do, but I've seen this before, and it could be something obscure like that you just wouldn't think to be causing the problem. Now, if you're sure there is no medical reason, obviously if there's a medical reason, see your doctor and have them help you work through that. But if there really is nothing medical going on and it's purely a behavioural challenge that you're seeing and you're getting prolonged wakings in the night, then first of all we need to check a couple of things. First of all, look at how your little one falls asleep at bedtime. What gets them off to sleep in the first place? Is it you? Is it a thing? Is there a ritual that you do? Does feeding or rocking take them off to sleep? Strokes, pats, singing. It may seem like a minor thing, but if it could be you're just there. You have to sit there with them. That's what you do. You sit there with them, then they go to sleep, and then that's fine. It could be anything, but just really home in on what it is that gets your child to sleep. If you find that, I say goodnight, they go to bed, I leave the room, they go off to sleep, no problem. Then I want you to delve in a little deeper and just see if you can work out how long it takes them to fall asleep. Now, we could be talking about any child, baby or child from 0 to 6 here. So things would be different depending on the age. I'm talking kind of generically across all ages. But home in on your little one, and if you think that's, if you put them down or you tuck them into bed, you leave the room and you don't hear a peep, then there's every suggestion there that little one is putting themselves to sleep, which is fantastic. But just see if you can find out, if you know, great, or if you can observe for a few nights and see how quickly they go to sleep. If you find they're nodding off in seconds or a couple of minutes or anything really short of 5 minutes, then the chances are they're very sleepy at that point. They're going into bed, or you're putting them down so drowsy or so tired that they are what I call kind of conking out very quickly. If that's the case, then they may be out of practice of putting themselves to sleep. Now, this is really deceiving. Parents so often say, yeah, my child puts themselves to sleep. I know they do. Just be sure it's not too quick. They may have eyes open and be chatting away, but if they're gone in less than 5 minutes, they're already in their light stages of sleep, or they are so exhausted, they're not truly going through the motions of consciously self-settling. And that's something that surprises lots of parents. So home in on that, work that one out. The reason I say this is because if you're finding that your child really struggles to get back to sleep in the night, that it could well be because they didn't put themselves to sleep properly in the first place. So they're looking for that help, or they're waiting for something to happen, or they're waiting to feel that sheer exhaustion again in order to fall asleep. And they're not going to feel that sheer exhaustion again because they've now had a few hours and it's going to seem harder. So really hone in on that bedtime settling piece. It will give you so many clues. Now let's assume that bit's taken care of, and they take 20 minutes to fall asleep at bedtime, and you're not even in the room. It's fine. They're happy. That they definitely self-settle at bedtime, and perhaps you don't see any other wakings in the night either, not anymore. Let's just say, for example, it's all fine other than this big patch where there's 2 hours in the night that they just are awake. Well, then we need to home in on what they're doing when they're awake and what you're doing when they're awake. If you're in and out too much, or you're in the room, or you're fussing too much, or you're just a part of that wakeful time too much, or you're trying to too hard, you're trying desperately hard to help them go back to sleep, so you're involved a lot, that in itself could be prolonging that wake up time. It could be that it's just so stimulating and there's too much going on. Some children are really susceptible to stimulation. It doesn't take much, and there's just no hope of them going back to sleep for a while. So try and step back a bit from that, and this will be more challenging for some than others. It really depends on what your child does. If they are awake for a couple of hours and they're just really irritable, upset, uncomfortable, if it's a tricky couple of hours, that's one thing. If it's that they're just awake but they're fine, they're just quite happy, they're content, they're just awake, and I see that quite a lot, then it could be something else going on. So look at what they're doing in that wakeful time and look at what you're doing in that wakeful time. Now let's say we've got to the point where, because I'm trying to unfold this like it's a mystery for you, so let's just say you've got to the point where it's not something that they're looking for or fussing for. It's not that they're trying to get you to do something for them, and that perhaps you don't even need to be in the room, but they're just awake. That's a head scratcher. What do they want? Why are they awake? What's the outcome? Do they eventually go back to sleep? Now, if they do, and I have seen this, if your child is waking, they're awake for a few hours and then they go back to sleep, but they don't really need anything from you, they're not looking for you, they're not looking for help, they're just awake, and you know it and you're aware of it, but they're fine, then try, as hard as it is, try not to worry too much about that. They're getting themselves back to sleep, and there's nothing, there's no need going on there. Of course, check out the medical possibilities and make sure there's nothing there, and then just look at how much overall sleep they get in any 24 hours. Just check that they're not overtired. Being overtired could cause a waking like this, and I know that's bizarre. You'd think that being overtired, you'd want to have a big sleep and catch up. Weirdly enough, it can cause wake-ups, it can cause disturbances to sleep and unsettled sleep. And it may be because they're overtired that you're getting this waking. So if your child really ought to still be napping, or if the naps that they take aren't really adequate, that could be the key, that could be the answer. If bedtime is too late, then maybe that's the reason and they need to get that bedtime sorted. Likewise, if they're an early riser and they start the day too early every day, that alone could be the reason for the overtiredness. So that will be where the work needs to go in. So there are some other possible reasons if you have that unfathomable, long, quite happy waking in the night. Let's say you're not there yet though. Let's say you are very much involved, you're trying hard to get them to go back to sleep, or you're there, or they want you there. That's another classic one. I get there, I don't have to do anything, I just have to be there. Okay, well then that tells me that the child is relying on your presence. They're relying on a check-in from you. They're relying on seeing you and knowing you're there. If that's the case, they probably rely on that at bedtime as well. Maybe they don't. Maybe at bedtime they don't need to see you there, but in the night they do. That then brings me back to the first piece about bedtime. If they're not fussed at bedtime, but they're very much fussed in the nighttime, that they need to know you're there, the chances are they are probably crashing out quite fast at bedtime, and it's not long enough for them to really consciously accept or protest the fact that you're not there at bedtime. Try going to bed a bit earlier. Try helping make sure that they are truly awake enough and conscious enough about bedtime, and make sure they're settling in somewhere between 10 and 20 minutes, and if they're doing that and you don't need to be there, we'll move on. If they're not doing that and they actually suddenly do need you there, therein lies the challenge, and it's a case then of gently weaning them off needing you there. Gently, they may need you for a bit, but we can work forward from that. If they are settling to sleep for within 10 to 20 minutes, totally on their own, not needing you there, not fussed at all, but they really are bothered in the night time and they really want to know you're there, then that could be a habit that's formed, and that they can get to sleep, but when they wake in the night, they're a bit like, when I wake up, you come, that's what we do, that's what happens. So again, we need to move forward from there. You need to change that response a bit and gradually help them become more able to replicate what they're doing at bedtime and settling themselves back down to sleep. Some little ones, and I've seen this a few times recently actually, this comes up quite a lot, they will want you there, but they don't go back to sleep even though you're there. So imagine you've gone in, you've got to say, okay, settle down, and you sit down and they want you there, but they don't go back to sleep. They're just, lying happily, nice and quiet and good, but won't go back to sleep. The reason for that will be that they're almost keeping themselves awake. They're checking you're there. They want to know that you're there. They want to know you're not going anywhere. And it's almost like they're not allowing themselves to relax and just let go and go back to sleep. They're waiting till it's getting up time and they want to make sure you're there the whole time. Now, if that is the case, so first of all, do address bedtime a bit more. Do make sure that there's really no reliance on you being there, because quite often in those situations, the little one is going to bed so tired that they're just not as bothered or just don't have it in them to need you there. And they're more accepting of going to sleep at that time. So they're part the way there, but getting to bed a bit earlier will probably help there. And if that makes bedtime a bit more of a challenge initially, then that's almost a good thing, because it means that they are showing you their real feelings about it, because they're awake enough. So you can then address those feelings and work through them with them. So then with those night wakings, we need to move on from you being there. We need to move on from you sitting there, because it's preventing, in this scenario, then it's preventing that child from putting themselves back to sleep. We know they can, but they're not letting themselves relax, they're not letting themselves go. So I would then devise a strategy, either of your own or with me, have a chat with me. We'll devise a strategy to enable you to not need to sit there, to let the child know that you're going to be close by. Perhaps you'll have to pop back a couple of times, but at least you're removing yourself from the sitting there with them and waiting it out. Because in this scenario, that's a child who is not letting themselves relax because they need to know you're there. Once they've learned and understood and accepted that you're not going to be right there, but you are nearby and you do come back and they are safe, they'll start to relax and let themselves go, and then hopefully put themselves back to sleep much quicker than having these great long wakeful times in the middle of the night. So there really is so much depth to it, and no two cases are really the same. What I've given you here are some examples and some possible outcomes, some possible scenarios that maybe some of you can relate to. Your situation may be slightly different, may not fit all of those criteria, and may require a slightly different response or a slightly different approach. There really is no limit to how many different situations and variations in how you would tackle it. But I've given you hopefully an example or two there, which many of you may be able to relate to, and it will help you move through this really tricky one where we see a child who's just awake for a big chunk of time in the middle of the night, and often we just don't know why.